we're doing this community walk and he's asking me about the work that I do. And I said, T, sometimes I feel like I'm unworthy to be in philanthropy. And he was like, well, what are you talking about? And I said, I feel like the real work is not actually where I am. The real work is where you are. It's in the community. It's going in and dealing with, they were doing violence interruption. I was like that's the heart of the work that's needed in the community. And T was like, but I can't do what you do. He's like, I belong where my ministry is calling me to be is in the community. Where your ministry is calling you to be is in those places to advocate, to get the resources for our community. So when I think about like my role in philanthropy, I always think about that some of my superpower is this ability to walk boldly in places that we're often not allowed into. So since I'm here, I might as well do the thing because I don't know how long this is going to last and what good does it make for me to be in here to be timid and quiet and afraid, right? Because our communities are not doing that. So I owe them the responsibility to do that within the philanthropic institutions.
Welcome to Black Philanthropy, Our Stories, where each episode spotlights awesome Black and African American leaders committed to transforming lives and communities through philanthropy. These authentic conversations will inspire, challenge, and remind you you are not alone. Here's your host, award-winning writer, director, and founder of Samuel and Murray, Michelle Renee Jackson.
We are so grateful for our next guest today, Maisha Simmons. Maisha Simmons is known by many people. She's got a huge following on social media. She is with, of course, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. But for those of us who don't know her yet, I thought it could be helpful for her to introduce herself and tell you a little bit more about what she cares about and how she enters this world. So Maisha, number one, just want to say thank you to you for taking the time to be with us on Black Philanthropy, Our Stories. We've been talking for a bit of time. It was wonderful to see you, I think, in April at the AbbVie conference.
Yes.
In I think it was Reparative Philanthropy session that I met you
Yes.
in. And you're just amazing.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for inviting me to be a part of this podcast. This is my first.
Welcome.
So I am excited to be joining the podcast world. And I just want to say before we get started, I appreciate what you're doing. There's not enough people out there who are really trying to capture our stories from the heart. I remember when we first started talking, I was like, well, I can talk about this in my work and that in my work. And you're like, no, this is a conversation about you. So I appreciate you inviting us in the field of philanthropy to talk about our journey and how we got here, in this work.
We're happy
So
to have you, Maisha. Welcome to your first podcast.
thank you. Thank you. So I am Maisha Simmons. I am a daughter. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a sister. I am the descendant of grandparents who are now ancestors. I'm a peacemaker. I'm a Leo. I'm justice rooted. I'm a friend. I am a survivor. I'm covered by grace. And most importantly, I'm Black and proud.
Awesome.
And I come to this work through a journey that always started with how can we keep community in the forefront of what we do? Because from my earliest memories, I would not be where I am today if someone did not believe in me, Maisha, and so into me, Maisha, and allowed me, Maisha, to dream the dreams beyond what I could even conceive. So I'm so glad and happy to be here today.
Oh, we're happy to have you today, Maisha. So let's talk a little bit about one, how you, and well, let me back up. One of my favorite questions to ask to start with is really about honor. And you talked about some of your grandparents being ancestors. My grandparents are ancestors as well. And for many of us who are in the space of philanthropy, we do it in communication in honor of others. I make no assumptions here that that might be the case for you, but I wondered, is there, when you think about your career in philanthropy that we'll talk a little bit more about, a lot bit more about, um, is there anyone or a community or a family member or an ancestor that you think about when you're doing this work that you try to honor and remember?
So I had the pleasure of sharing life with three grandparents, each of them very different, and each of them heavily involved in my life. But the if I say who I do this work on behalf of, I would say it would be my mother's mother, Louise Bronson,
Hmm.
who was born in the South in Tampa, Florida. Her mother died really young, so she was raised by the village. And she had six children, one of them being my mother. And my grandmother, although not college educated, she was a domestic worker for most of her life. She did, towards the end of her life, have the opportunity to become a certified nursing assistant and work in a local hospital. All of her children had the opportunity to go to college. They all had lives that were enriched and enhanced by family. And she did this basically as a single mother.
Mm,
And so when I think about the work that I've done in philanthropy or even across other aspects of my career, I often bring my grandma Louise into the center because I want to think about for the policies and the work that we do and the opportunities that we're able to provide. If my grandmother had had those types of opportunities and what she was able to do without a lot of
mhm,
opportunity, what could our family look like had we had access generations ago?
mhm.
So I often center my grandma Louise in our thinking, and I believe I carry her with me all the time when thinking about the work we could do.
I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for Grandma Louise. I just want to acknowledge my own Grandma Louise. For those of you who don't know, that our company is called Samuel and Murray in honor of our grandmother's maiden names, and we come from Mildred Samuel Murray and Louise Murray Jackson. So thank you for being another descendant of Louise and
Mm,
for honoring her. These women that we come from are so amazing. And as you think about Grandma Louise, how does that? Can you talk more about your own journey into
yeah,
philanthropy and what was the catalyst for you actually entering into it? Or what was the plan ahead of time? And was there a
yeah.
transition into it?
Yeah, there definitely was a transition. This was not the plan. So I joke with people all the time and I say, when I graduated from high school and went to college, my job that I went to college thinking I was going to do was going to be a psychologist in the prison system.
Hmm.
That I went to I went to Rutgers University with that in mind. And I graduated with that in mind. I was a psychology major in undergrad. When I left school, I got a job working in a halfway house. I was like, Maisha, you are on your way there.
Mhm.
And when we got when we went to the job and we had the first, set of trainings, anything you do when you start new jobs like that, there was a safety class. And I was like, why are we taking a safety class? And
Mhm.
they were like, well, sometimes the young people, they can get agitated, we're trying to protect you so you're not in harm's way. And that was the minute I told myself, I was like, I'm not built to I'm not a fighter, I'm a lover. As you said, I said I was a peacemaker, right? So
That's
I said,
right.
I'm not sure if this is the path for me. And so after that, I went to AmeriCorps. And AmeriCorps is an opportunity. It's almost like the domestic peace. It was called the Domestic Peace Corps. And it gives you an opportunity to work in the nonprofit sector in various areas across the country. And so I was an AmeriCorps volunteer at a daycare center slash emerging faith-based nonprofit. And one of the things that they taught me how to do and they wanted me to do for the organization was write grants.
Mm, mhm.
So pretty much early on out of college, I was helping to think about um, how do we resource communities in a way through grant funding. And it was that grant funding opportunity that took me through different jobs, different jobs within my community. And surprisingly enough, working in the faith-based institutions doing this type of work. And so I was writing grants and then implementing the programs that were aligned with the grants. And then it was really good. I was decent at it, right? If anybody knows about grant writing,
Mhm.
it can be a tough field because as many yeses you get nos, but you
Mhm.
got to keep going on to do that work.
Mhm.
And I had the opportunity to really get to know community there. I had the opportunity to understand community power. I understood what would happen if we weren't if our business model wasn't able to maintain the work after the grant, right? So it gave me a lot of what it meant for a nonprofit to navigate a temporary source of funding. And then I had an opportunity to go to grad school. And in grad school, I also was placed in an organization through my externship. I was placed in an organization where I was writing more grants.
Mhm.
And but this was different because the grants that I was writing before I went to grad school were about service provision. How do we get basic human needs to communities? The grant writing that I was doing through my grad school program was about organizing and
Okay.
how do we bring communities together. And it was in that program that I was introduced to some of my colleagues who had the opportunity to actually be placed in philanthropy. Now, philanthropy is a place that I knew about it because I wrote grants to philanthropic organizations, but I
Mhm.
never thought it was a place that I can actually go and work until I saw peers who were about the same place in their career path that I was in, actually, interning and working at these philanthropic organizations. And so through the program, we each were able to share what our experiences were like. And I said to myself in that program, I said, if I get a chance to work in a philanthropic organization, I'm going to take that chance because I was able to see, I understood what it meant to get a grant from a philanthropic organization, but through that program, I really understood kind of the power and the gravitas that came with those types of resources, the
Mhm.
ability to share those types of resources. And quite frankly, in other places that I had, either volunteered, I had this one person tell me, you won't be able to work in philanthropy until you've, had at least 20 years in a career because those positions are reserved for people who have like a lot of gravitas and status and things of that nature. But I parked that in the back of my head because, going back to my grandmother,
Mhm.
I don't let people's experience or expectations for me define the expectations that I have for myself.
Mhm.
And so it was the opportunity. So once I heard about some of my colleagues being able to take this opportunity, I had gotten a job after grad school working in United Way, which is kind of like an intermediary. So our
Right.
United Way, they give away money, but they also raise money. Of
Mhm.
course, given my past experiences, I was on the grant writing side, but
Mm.
I also had a little bit of exposure into what it meant to give away money. And then I saw a posting to work at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And so I said, I might as well try, right? What difference does it make? I told myself I would give this opportunity. RWJ is based in New Jersey. That's where I'm from.
Mhm.
Go for it. Applied, forgot about it, kept on doing what I was doing. And then I got the call to interview for a program associate job. And I called my mother and I said, Mommy, I got this call, but I just like I'm about 3 months into this job here at the United Way. And she was like, well, didn't you apply for the job? I said, yeah, but I never really thought they would
Yeah.
call.
Yeah.
And she said, well, go on the interview, see where it may take you.
Hmm.
And here we are 16 years later. And what it's taken me is this beautiful journey on understanding what power, privilege, resources, networks, communication, with all types of people
Hmm.
can really do to think about the change that we want to see in the world. And it really takes me back when I was going to college and saying, you know, I wanted to make change in a very specific and a unique way. And this work in philanthropy has actually made that opportunity to happen much bigger, broader, and bolder than I ever could have imagined when I, started this journey of thinking about change for a community back in high school.
When you got is it a program associate
Mhm.
position? What was
Yes.
that department that you were a part of?
So, when I came to the foundation, at the time, we had just launched a call to reverse the trend of childhood obesity. And so I started as a program associate working in our area of childhood obesity. Now, what makes philanthropy interesting, and my journey in particular, is I came to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation with, I didn't have a public health background. My degree was in psychology. I had been working in nonprofit organizations. Lots of folks at RWJ had academic credentials. They were doctors, they were lawyers. So early on, I kind of said, "Well, why am I here? Like, what do I, someone who's pretty much worked in local and regional nonprofits, what do I bring to the table at an organization like RWJF?" And it's interesting because the person who hired me, Dr. Dwayne Proctor, who is still in the field now, he is the president of the Missouri Foundation for Health,
Hmm.
said to me, Maisha, we brought you here because of your experience in working in community.
Hmm.
We have enough academics, we have enough doctors. We don't have enough people who have your unique experience. So that role in as a program associate, which by the way, is a much junior position than the experience I'd had in the field. But again, sometimes when you enter philanthropy, the value, and especially a philanthropic organization like RWJF, the value of lived experience, community organizing, thinking about how to work in nonprofit organizations
Hmm.
doesn't hold the same type of gravitas as someone who's been a professor at Yale,
Hmm.
something like that. And so I started much more junior than my status, but I've been able to, over the years, really I've had like maybe 10 different jobs within RWJF. I'm probably exaggerating, but several jobs that have shifted the role from that position. And what made the childhood obesity um, work compelling to me, it yes, the subject matter area was compelling. We know that if children are overweight and obese in their early ages, we know the long-term health outcomes and what that means for them. But it was the intentionality of that work specifically to work with children who have the highest rates of obesity, which sadly are our Black and Brown children
Hmm.
in this country. And it was one of the only strategies at the foundation at the time that was specifically and uniquely looking at racism and health outcomes together. And it is that lens of doing the work. It had a very intentional community organizing strategy. So it's that combination of things that made this work to me very attractive, in addition to thinking about the population level health outcomes that we could achieve.
For people who are not familiar with RWJF's
Yes.
mission, can you say a little bit more about what you guys are up to over there?
Yeah, so the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is a New Jersey based but national philanthropy who, in our work, we have elevated health and health outcomes as the driving factors in the way that we want to see change in systems. So, our North Star is we want to live in a world where health is not a privilege, but a right.
Hmm.
And this is something that grounds the work that we do. Our work is focused in policy and systems change. And we are really driving for a place where, where health is, everyone has the ability and opportunity to access good health and well-being. And so we do this through a variety of strategies, looking at healthy children and families, healthy communities, We look at tools like impact investing. We look at the healthcare system, the public health system, and all of this kind of combination coming together in addition to global health and what are some new innovations health. We do this all with centering the addressing structural racism in health outcomes. The work that I'm doing now at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is also helping us make sure that when we're doing this work to address structural racism, we are developing and creating tools to operationalize equity in the work that we do.
Can you tell us more about what you're doing right now?
Yeah. So, a couple of maybe I've for about 2 years now, I've been in part of a new department at the foundation called Equity and Culture. And for someone like me who's been at RWJ a long time and where we really, when I started, did not have the explicit language to talk about racial equity as it relates to health. It's been a long time in coming to have a department that explicitly focuses on this. And our department um, does this in I like to say it's kind of two types of ways. So we look at everything from the operations of the institution and if it's equitable. So think about the systems in your organization, procurement, human resources, finance, legal, right?
Mhm.
How are all of those systems that keep the business running operating, and are they equitable, right? Are we thinking about our clients, our vendors, our staff in a ways that they are experiencing equitable opportunities, and who we work with, we're really looking across the gamut and making sure that we are working with, minority and women and business owners and things of that nature.
Mhm.
So we have one hand, we call it kind of our folks who work on the inside. And then I spend most of my time on our programmatic work. So how are we developing equitable practices and principles as we think about our programmatic work and the work that we're doing in the field? So are our strategies rooted in equity and justice? Our approaches when we think about how do we engage with grantees and partners, are we working at the biggest swaths of the folks who are communities who are most impacted? Are they getting a fair and equitable opportunity and a chance to compete and to work with us on the solutions that we have? Because I truly believe, and many of us at RWJF believe, that if you're not working with communities most impacted, and then you're not actually getting the solutions that are going to work for people. Going back to grandma,
Mhm.
if it wouldn't work for grandma,
Mhm.
and someone in somebody's research organization is saying what's best for grandma, I actually need to hear from grandma what's best for her. And so are we doing that in the work that we're doing? And then are the outcomes that we are seeking to achieve actually moving the needle for communities most impacted? So we're not just tinkering at the margins of one singular silver bullet that's going to solve all the ills of society. We actually are taking a comprehensive look at what the challenges are and thinking about how are the solutions developed and built in order for folks to have a healthy outcome at the end of the day. So our work, and we do this through that work. Excuse me, we do that through thinking about our current day practices and systems. And then we also do this through taking a historical look back at what are some of the things that we've done in the past and what do we need to shift today for to make sure that we have health equitable outcomes in the present day.
How is that going within the institution, within the foundation?
It is an evolving journey, I will say. And the reason why I say that is RWJF is an institution that is entrenched in deeply rooted corporate ideology. Um, and I would say corporate ideology tied to the medical model. And that thinking, again, I'm not a public healther, I don't have a medical degree, but that thinking comes with, and I would say this is not rare for philanthropy, but it comes with somewhat of a saviorship type of thinking. It has a type of thinking that, and it can have a type of culture that, my medical background gives me the right to dictate um how outcomes should look in communities. And so when you're in part of our looking back and the work that we're doing in embedding equity, it actually is saying there are other experts than
Mhm.
you are used to talking to,
Mhm.
that you're used to learning from. And let's invite in those experts, that expertise to your analysis. And so you can imagine where folks are really have indoctrinated themselves into the written word and certain ways of thinking and being, that when you add something that is much more holistic, community oriented, may not have the same level of evidence that you're used to from the scientific journals where you've gotten your cues and lessons for the past, there is a friction and a rub that comes with bringing that other element into the work. And so I would say, as much as the thinking of what it means to do equitable work, folks are excited about. When it actually means you have to shift and change, that's when we're starting to see, you know, folks trying to push against actually doing it, because people want to do both, and they want to still do some of the work from the mental model of the past
Mhm.
and do the community oriented work as well. And then at the end of the day, whatever shakes out, that's kind of where we go. And I think that doing this work has given me a lot of lessons in what does it mean to think about institutional change,
Mhm.
change management, how are we shifting cultures, internal cultures, what's happening in the outside world that's informing that cultural shift. You know, sometimes philanthropy can operate in an island where we've got our strategies and goals, and what's happening in the world actually may not matter. But right now, that's actually not the case. And when you're doing equity work, right?
Mhm.
Um the it is just important to understand the context of what is happening now, and in the policies and in the ways things are happening in federal government, and how that impacts health and well-being, and us being able to move and pivot and be nimble for that. So I would say there's a lot of enthusiasm about how to do the work. We are continuing to build tools and know-how on what to actually do, like practices to actually shift to
Mhm.
do the work in a different way. And you know, I think we're going into a season where there may be some pain points, but you know, there's nothing that I have found in my life. There's nothing that you do that's sometimes you know, the squeeze is going to happen, but on the other side something beautiful can be on the other side. So I'm really in excited about what is going to happen on the other side, even though there may be some ways that folks are not understanding the work or maybe challenging it in a way, because we are shifting the norm of how they normally work.
So, Maisha, who are those experts?
We have spent some time, and this is one of the things that I am happy to have done over the years. We are actually increasing how we're working with movement leaders and movement organizers in the work that we do. And I will say, my the way I've done philanthropy has grown tremendously from being able to sit at the feet of various movement leaders over time and understanding the true nature of what needs to happen. But that's like me as an individual, as Maisha, as when I was a program officer, like how I was able to have work that was influenced by that. Now we're trying to build that even broader and systematize that in a way that, there is an expectation that folks across the foundation are going to bring in people who come from movement and organizing and grassroots organizations and bring that into the work and then actually shift and change your approaches based upon that information, because there's nothing worse than tokenizing
Hmm.
community voice as we think about our strategy and then feeling like you've checked the box because you've listened. But if you've listened and you haven't done anything, then why did you listen in the first place? And
Hmm.
so what we're really trying to do is saying that listening needs to build to intentional and strategic shifts in the approaches that you are doing, who you're resourcing, and how you're funding them.
So I know some of our listeners, again, who are not necessarily familiar with the foundation, sometimes it's helpful for people to understand the scale of a foundation just based on its endowment size and its allocation size. Can you share a little bit more about what the endowment size is for the foundation?
So the RWJF endowment, it usually ranges anywhere between upwards of 10 to 20 billion dollars. And according to kind of tax law and our required payout, we pay out anywhere upwards of 5 to 7% on any given sets of years on a rolling basis.
Hmm. So significant endowment.
We do have a significant endowment. And I think one of the things that we recognize is, especially when we do the work from the equity lens that we're doing it from, is that with those types of resources, we have a great responsibility to make sure that the work that we're doing is impacting community and moving the needle on outcomes in communities across the country.
Right now, for a foundation with an endowment that large, it sounds like a foundation with an endowment that large would be aware of some of the challenges that are happening right now within the sector of philanthropy with the new administration. And insofar that you can you share a little bit about how the changes within the sector of philanthropy that are coming with the new administration impact foundations like yours that are so equity oriented?
At the beginning of the year, there were a lot of conversations, as folks may know across philanthropy, about what are the implications of some of the what was proposed in Project 2025 as it related to the philanthropic sector. Um, you know, especially organizations that have racial justice or racial equity as core to how they feel like change should happen in the world. And so, our CEO, like many across the country, were, joining various tables that were talking about democracy. There were tables that were organized to talk about the philanthropic sector. There were tables that were organized, as you saw what happened with, erasing data from specific government places where we catalog specific data around public health and health data and what was coming down around that. And so, um, our response pulled multiple levers. One, we recognized, and I think our president and CEO was really good at this in saying that as much as there is an attack on philanthropy, or it seems to be an attack on philanthropy, first and foremost, the attack in communities is far worse. The attack on the nonprofit sector that's not philanthropy is far worse. Because even because an organization like us, that I said, is highly endowed, we have lots of resources to protect ourselves.
Hmm.
But the communities and the community nonprofit organizations do not have the same level of resources. And that's why we're seeing the attacks in the way that is happening, quite frankly, where, folks are being stripped of millions of dollars that's going into the infrastructure for some of the most vulnerable, marginalized communities in our country. So we wanted to make sure that we uh, balance the intensity of response, prioritizing communities most impacted in the way that we were looking at, joining certain tables and thinking about where resources could go. The other thing that we did is we began to run scenarios to think about if there are certain things that happen in a tax law, and in addition to the 5 to 7% payout, we're required to pay out more. What does that mean for the endowment?
Mhm.
If there is a way that we're taxed in a different type of way, what does that mean for the resources? So beginning to just prepare financially for what that looks like. We've been having conversations internally about situating risk in a different type of way. Risk to whom?
Hmm.
Who is bearing the most risk? How do we readjust when we think about risk and think about risk to impact and the risk that our grantees are absorbing? And where can we absorb risk as we think about the challenges that are coming out from the administration? We also mobilized across the various areas where we heard from our grantee partners, where it's some of the things that we are used to resourcing them, they actually needed something different. Like, can we repurpose our dollars to pay for safety and security?
Hmm.
Because
Mhm.
we are, the organizations that we have, we're under a heightened threat. And, we want to repurpose some of our resources to do that. Can our funding be more general so that we can be more flexible? So if something comes up and there was a programmatic approach that we really thought was a specific way to do the work, can we get more general operating support? So we really thought about that. RWJ, we're a health foundation. We really don't work in democracy spaces as much as some of the others, but there are some ways that we've joined democracy tables as a health funder to bring a different lens and approach to the democracy table, and also for the democracy table to inform us, because if we have a crumbling democracy, then what's going to happen to our health systems and things of that nature? So we begin to diversify who the partners are that we are working with. And then some of the work that I worked immediately on was, can we infuse in a responsible way more resources to grassroots and power building organizations? Because part of what is happening in our country is a fragmentation of our grassroots and power building organizing with a racial justice lens. So we know that philanthropic dollars are not going to replace the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been just sucked out of community
Mm.
by the federal government. But what are the types of ways that we can continue to resource community to build that power to shift and change practices that we're all kind of living under now? And then I would say the last thing that we're starting to do more of, and it is happening in fits and starts across the foundation, is really wrestling with, if 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 the world, if some of the things that is happening and the systems that we know did not work well for people in the first place, maybe it's time for us to again listen to community and reimagine the systems of what they should be.
Mhm.
Right? So if Medicare is about to be decimated by the big beautiful bill, where people are calling it the Reconstruction Bill, then Medicare didn't work great for people in the first place. There were a lot of challenges and problems with Medicare, and I'm not a healthcare expert, but there were a lot of challenges and problems. Maybe let's spend some time reimagining, what does health access look like for all? Because after all, our North Star is a health being a right and not a privilege. So what does
Mhm.
that really look like? And let's spend some time investing in solutions that are beyond the common, beyond fixing broken systems.
Predominantly, some of the work that you do, of course, is in the health equity space. And I wonder two things. If it matters to you that you are a Black female in this space doing this work, and if it matters to the Black and Brown communities that you work with, that you are also a Black female in this space.
There's nothing that I do that I can't see from the lens of a Black woman. Michelle. And I really think that it us the m- our work at RWJF has become more sophisticated, deeper, more connected the more we've engaged with Black people, and I would even say other races of folks who have come into RWJF in the last 5 years. And so it definitely matters because, again, I go back to my grandma Louise. When I bring her into the room and think about what she may have wanted or needed, Black women have kind of always known what we've needed to make our communities survive and have not always had the adequate access. If they would have had, what would have been different. And so
Mm,
bringing that lens to our work, doing racial justice work in a climate that, quite frankly, in some circles can be dangerous. Um, Means that one, we have to continue to protect our peace, right? I cannot do this work if I'm completely consumed by how daunting it is all the time. If we do not understand how to rest from it, and I know folks say, "Well, you're in philanthropy, you give away money. How hard can that be?" You know, it's not the giving away money that is hard. It is, are we making the right choices with the resources that we have? That's
mhm.
the hard part. Are we actually getting the resources to the people who need them? And continuing to remember that. And I think there's a unique way as Black people that we bring that to that sense of accountability to community, we actually bring to work. It is not okay to leave folks behind. I think about that picture where it's the man and he's got his hand holding down and pulling up the generation behind him. We bring that to this work in healthcare and health policy.
Maisha, how do you find rest in this work?
You know, I was never great at it, but then I had last year I had a major health challenge that made me have to rest. And I came out of that health challenge saying that I'm going to be intentional about my rest. So I have done a couple of things. I have taken my vacations the way I should be.
Mhm.
I have been, and when I'm in those vacations, I'm prioritizing rest. I'm not prioritizing another to do list.
Mhm.
And I think it has been giving myself the permission to do that. I have from time to time, I haven't been great with it, but I've worked with journals that has helped me center my rest and and my well-being that when I am doing it. And I think I've found care and cover in a community of girlfriends who are in various different careers, but still all connected somehow to either philanthropy or the nonprofit sector. And we have been a safe space for each other as we are navigating what is tumultuous times. And then I'll say on my fun side of rest, I've been looking on Instagram on trying to learn all the line dances, all of them. I want to learn all the dances, boots on the ground, the Tamia one, all of them. I've been trying to learn them all.
Awesome. 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 We will have to have you back when you do learn them all so you could teach us to do them as well. Can you talk a little bit about the TRT program that you helped lead?
Yeah, so truth, repair, and transformation has been a bulk of the work that we've been doing at the Equity and Culture Department. And it has been our way to connect into reparative philanthropy. And I honestly believe that if philanthropy is not repairing, then we're not doing what we're called to do. And the original notion of philanthropy is the beloved community, right? You can't be in beloved relationship if you're not thinking about, if I've harmed you, how do I repair?
Maisha, before you keep on going, I want to ask you for those people, for many, reparative philanthropy is a new concept. Can you just talk a little bit more about what reparative philanthropy is?
Yeah, it is really taking a a more holistic approach to what can be leveraged through the resources that philanthropy has to offer. And so some folks will think the work of reparations comes out of reparative. Reparative philanthropy is attached to reparations. Thinking about policies that are harm that are have looked at the harm and are trying to fix in a transformative way, right? Not in a broken systems way, but a really transformative way of thinking about how do we um, repair what has happened in communities. And so our truth repair and transformation process is really a way of looking at our institution and its role in the health and healthcare sector. And if there were ways that decisions that were made, ways that we've aligned the work, different people who we've prioritized, um, really taking the opportunity to say, um, what are ways that certain communities may have been harmed and certain communities or individuals may have been privileged in the decisions that we've made. So we talk about looking at this work through a TRT lens. And this has taken us on a journey of looking across multiple domains at the foundation. There are 6 working groups that are working from everything to looking at our endowment, to looking at our internal culture, to even looking at our role in our home state of New Jersey. Those are just a few of them. And really looking back so we can look forward. What are some of the ways that we've operated historically to and who were we listening to and whose decisions were we prioritizing historically, and what does that mean for us now in present terms? What has gotten into the water, what has gotten into the culture of who we are as an institution that exists today? If we have identified that there were some ways that there were in that decision making process of who is harmed, who is privileged, and who is harmed, if we have seen that there have been some harms, what are the opportunities to repair and redress and transform the way we are? Now, all of that is really deep and intentional work, and we are at RWJF, we are at the truth phase. We are still doing the discovery. We're still learning. We're taking the historical look back and starting to identify some emerging trends that we see exist today. And so we're really excited about this process. We've engaged the Wisdom Council for our TRT process, and these are people who have worked in philanthropy, they've worked in organizing, they've worked in healthcare, and they're going to help us stay true to what we discover through this process when we get to repair. Because we truly believe, or I truly believe, that repair, if philanthropy designs its own repair, if we design our own reparative processes, we're not going to go far enough. And so, how do we work with community? How do we work with people outside of our institution to think about redress and repair so that we're truly transforming how we're working in the future?
One of the things that we've started doing in the last couple of episodes is getting questions from our community. We have an really awesome Black Philanthropy's Our Story listening community. And I had asked them if they had any questions for you, should they be interviewing you here? And we have some really awesome questions. And so the first question comes from a colleague named Dawn Hill. And this is Dawn Hill's question. One of the concerns that I have about establishment philanthropic communities, such as the foundation that you're a part of, is that it seems that only the privileged, by education, by position, by wealth, or otherwise, have voice and influence in decision and policy making. Your board and your staff is very impressive. And it is clear that their intentions are impeccable and their knowledge is great, but doesn't justice require that marginalized communities become real players and partners in the struggle? And he asks, is this assessment of his unfair? And what does the foundation do to make sure that those who are most impacted by its work have real and a sustained voice?
This critique of philanthropy is not unique to RWJF. Especially ones that are that come from the origin story that we come from, which is tied to corporate wealth, right? A lot of the corporate um, ideologies seep into the culture of the institution. Um, I will say that our board of trustees over the last 5 years has evolved. Um, and I would say evolved to include more people who um, either represent communities that have lived experiences that we're trying to address as part of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, or, and even some of the board members themselves having those experiences. Not the majority, right? Not the majority of our board, but a growing amount. So, a growing amount of people who have those experiences. Um, I would say to add to that, when we think about our board and its role, it has become even more evolving to be more about the governance of the institution and less about the individual decisions that are made about the programming that happens at the institution. I know there's some philanthropic boards where the board is actually making the decision about every grant, and that's not the case at RWJF. There's a certain threshold where the board gets involved in those decisions. And so I think there's an opportunity for more change in terms of the board being more diverse from their different lived experiences. Um, I think that also in an organization like RWJ, that there's opportunity to get involved at the level where programmatic decisions are happening.
Hmm.
And so there's some examples where we have invited in, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, grassroots organizations, people with lived experiences to advise to and on some of the strategies and the approaches that we've made. I will by no stretch of the means would I say we're an organization that has fully embraced participatory grant making. So that grant making that happens where you have the community decides how the assets are distributed.
Hmm.
That's not where we've moved to. It'll be interesting to see where our TRT process may land in terms of moving the needle and moving us more to that type of approach. But we have in different ways that we divine strategies and approaches have included an element of participatory grant making and specific bodies of work. We have created advisory councils. So, for instance, our work that we do with children and families, there's a parent advisory council that advises that particular portfolio on what are some of the strategies and approaches that work best for parents. We have created ways to get closer and more proximal to community as a national philanthropy. But I think this is a point taken. We can do much more at RWJF. And I think as we do our equity work, we really are trying to think about how to systematize it in a deeper way.
Our next question comes from uh, Morris Price, who's also a guest, and it really has an awesome episode on boards. And so, who doesn't
Uh,
want to talk about boards? We've just talked about boards, interestingly
mhm.
enough. So, Morris's question is: as an ABFI fellow and past Emerging Leader Award recipient, you've been recognized for your leadership, of course, in Black philanthropy. What do you see as the unique role of Black leaders in philanthropy driving reparative policies and practices within the broader philanthropic sector?
When I think about our role as Black people in philanthropy and what makes our role unique is the the boldness that we bring to this work. And when I say that, I say that to say, when I got the award from AbbVie, it was at the time where my some of the biggest bodies of work that I was working on was our work with young men and boys of color. And it was work that, as again, like as I talked about the RWJF, to intentionally call out that we want to work on it, for the health and well-being for young men and boys of color was counterculture to RWJF. We would say, emerging youth, or teens, or something,
Mhm.
but the intentionality to bring race into the conversation was something that, um, I want to say, had it not been a Black person, people of color, we knew we had to be intentional to say who we wanted to work with in this work. And it's that boldness that I believe we bring to this work, because, I mean, if we don't do it, who's going to do it?
Mhm.
Right? It's like there is a when you do this work, I feel like there is a spirituality, there's a calling to um call out the thing so that our communities can get the resources that they need. I'll give you a really quick story. It's a story I love to tell. Um, One of the projects that I worked on was violence prevention, and we did a community walk. And in this community walk, I was walking with this young man who his name is T. And we're doing this community walk, and he's asking me about the work that I do. And I said, T, sometimes I feel like I'm unworthy to be in philanthropy. And he was like, well, what are you talking about? And I said, I feel like the real work is not actually where I am. The real work is where you are. It's in the community. It's going in and dealing with, they were doing violence interruption. I was like that's the heart of the work that's needed in the community.
Mhm.
And T was like, but I can't do what you do.
Mhm.
He's like, I belong where my ministry is calling me to be is in the community. Where your ministry is calling you to be is in those places to advocate to get the
Mhm.
resources for our community. So when I think about like my role in philanthropy, I always think about that. um some of my superpower is this ability to walk boldly in places that we're often not allowed into.
Right.
So since I'm here, I might as well do the thing, because I don't know how long this is going to last, and what good does it make for me to be in here to be timid and
Right.
quiet and afraid, right? Because our communities are not doing that. So I owe them the responsibility to do that within the philanthropic institutions.
You can't transform communities with just people working on the ground who can't be paid to be working on the ground, right?
That's
And
right.
so you are able to create that funding for them to be able to do that work. Doris Barron, who's one of our members of our community, also asked this question. And it's a corporate question, but I think given the way that you have identified the corporate culture within the foundation, that you might have some thoughts about it. But essentially, her question is, she says, I have an issue with DEI in the corporate world. My question is, how can an organization claim to embrace DEI when it is so easy to eliminate it from the organizational culture as soon as they no longer have to demonstrate it? Case in point, Target. True DEI is not a line item on a strategic plan. It is an essential part of the corporate culture. It is shown without having to say it. And she wonders what you think about that.
I agree. I agree 100%. Part of the work, part of my frustration uh, in philanthropy is how fickle we can be, how, we can shift and change our minds if we feel like strategies or approaches are too hard or not going our way. And DEI work is a victim of that thinking and that mentality. It's part of the reason why I shifted my role within the philanthropy to be a part of this new team that sole purpose was operationalizing diversity, equity, and inclusion into our systems, policies, and practices, because this work is so fragile. It can go away at any moment. But when you get it into the water, when you bake it into the culture of the institution, it doesn't stop with just one initiative. So, an example is, we ask questions about equity in the competencies of an applicant. We ask questions about equity in a vendor that we're going to work with. We ask questions about equity in the strategies that are developed by the programming team. We ask about how our staff who help us plan our meetings, what are the questions they are asking to make them more inclusive, right? If we had not taken the time to, it's painstaking work, because you're pulling out every policy and procedure and making sure that there's a question there or there's an approach there that is in that's integrating this work into the systems of the institution, the same way any other corporate culture can be put into a system of an organization. So I say, I don't, I am disappointed at how easy it is for people to leave what we know um, has given access to so many of us behind, in the name of profit, in the name of being palatable to others, in the name of, whatever it is that you've taken your DEI work away. When we know that and the data shows that when we as a country have made things more equitable, then it doesn't just benefit the people who you think are getting the access, it benefits us all. So Dr. Angela Glover Blackwell talks about the curb effect. When they cut curbs into sidewalks, it wasn't just good for people who needed wheelchairs. It was good for mothers who had baby carriages. It was good for people who were dragging luggage. It was good for people who had problems with their knees who were still walking, right? So it benefited everyone. And so when we think about that positioning for DEI, and not what people are losing, but what you're gaining, it means that you take the time to do the deeper work to get it entrenched into your organization and culture.
Our last question from our community today comes from Cheryl Wesley. And she basically says, in this climate overall, what does Black joy look like in general? And then what does it look like for you?
Yeah. So I have a 10-year-old, and there's a beauty about being able to, especially in this time, um engage with and be around young people,
Hmm.
because at the age of 10, he is starting to understand difference in people. And I'm encouraged by the way that he wants to see the world be a beautiful place.
Hmm.
And I really, for me, like, the Black joy is holding on to, innately, in our community, we've always wanted the best for others. We start that way. We
Hmm.
start that way. And so Black joy for me is reminding me of that youthful view of the world that really is thinking about love for humankind. Um, I think what makes it uniquely Black is the celebration of our culture within it.
Hmm.
And so you have this love, and then you have this love of not just humankind, but you have love of things that are, um, for me, that I will say, what to me symbolizes Blackness. Everybody has their own thing. Like, so for me, it's my other grandmother's sweet potato pie. Like, and being able to remember what it smelled like and what it tastes like, and what the joy, people snatching their own little piece and trying to, she had to bake so many because everybody wanted, like, more to take home. And that was something that she did with love and was with our culture, and it makes me think of joy. And then for myself, and and then just unapologetically, just loving on ourselves.
Mhm.
Um, when the world is trying to pick on us. I love the fact I mentioned before the line dances. I love the fact that right now we're in a season of line dance, which means everybody can participate. You don't need a partner. I don't need a boo. You don't need, you can just get out there and do it, and everybody can do it at the same time.
Mhm.
And when you're out there learning, people are trying to teach you.
Mhm.
There's no competition, right? They're trying, come on, join with me. This collective sense of belonging and joy, for me, is how I'm trying to think about experience Black joy in the soul of my memories and in the present day.
Thank you for sharing that, Maisha. I think it's hard to explain the joy that exists innately in every Black community that you go into. When you see a bunch of Black people in a space, particularly if they don't know each other, but they're just sort of all coming together, everybody is there's joy. There's
Mhm.
joy. There's joy.
Mhm.
When I bring friends who are not from Black communities into those spaces, they're like, everybody's so happy.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're like, but we don't, where does that joy come from? It comes from ourselves. It comes from the ancestors. It comes from God. It comes from knowing that our hope does not come from our federal government or from what
That's right.
agencies in place or what foundations are in place, but ultimately that we are the ones that will save ourselves. Essentially,
That's
that
right.
we have the capacity to do that.
That's
So,
right.
I'm so grateful to have you, to have other colleagues that our listeners now have you as a new colleague in this work, and who can be reminded that there can be joy in this work as well, even though it's so hard, even though you do need rest as well. There's joy, and sometimes
Yes.
the joy doesn't have to be that hard, I should say.
Mm-mm.
Okay,
Yes.
I think there's so much value in failing, and there's so much information to be gained from trying something, going in a direction to realize that it didn't work out, but that there's information to gain from that, that one, if we're paying attention, can apply and make different, hopefully more informed decisions moving forward. And I
Mhm.
wondered, for your own career now in philanthropy,
Mhm.
is there a particular failure or mistake that you made that you found it to be especially valuable for how it informed your next decisions about your life?
Yes. And and if anybody says they don't have something where they thought they could have done something differently, I'd love to talk to them and understand what their journey has been, because this work is so dynamic, and what may feel right from where you sit may actually be wrong for what's happening in community. And I would say, for me, uh there were we when we first started our work at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation on trying to be more intentional about our equity work. um, we worked with a consulting partner to help us think through, like, how do we even begin to get this ideology into the minds of our staff and colleagues. And we worked with a well-renowned organization. I'm not going to name their names, but if you think about folks that do race conscious work, we were working with them. And I was really excited because we had this opportunity to um bring folks into a conversation that I've been hungering for RWJF to have for so long. And so in our work together, we were thinking about, like, what were the learning sessions, what were the opportunities that we could have to, have folks start to understand these concepts. And when I was working with the consulting organization, there was this constant push pull, because they were working from the position of what they knew best would work in an institution, and I was working from a position from what would be palatable, because I didn't want this chance for us to start to do this work fail and people not hear it, and then we don't do it anymore. The stakes were so high for me that we get it, quote unquote, right. That I was actually challenging the wisdom of these consultants and what they've done in lots of organizations over time. But I'm like, but we're so unique and we're so different. And at the end of the day, it worked because they didn't listen to me, quite frankly. They pushed, and I said, "Well, fine. we'll just do it your way. And, if we don't, if this doesn't work, then, we'll know that you're not the best organization for us to work with. And I was completely wrong, because their wisdom, their approach, their longevity, and what it meant to do change management work at the institution level. They've done it in government, they've done it in nonprofits, they've done it in philanthropy. I did not want to lean into that wisdom, because I wanted what I thought was a self-proclaimed RWJF win, so that we could keep doing the work. And so that was a lesson for me in, um, when we bring organizations and institutions to push us, open up the space to allow for the push. Lean in on the expertise that you may not have, so that at the end of the day you can get a result that you can. And if they had not listened, if they had listened to me and failed, that would have been a bad reflection on the organization. Like, I wasn't even thinking about what it meant for them to fail at my direction, and what the implications could have been for that. So it really was a space for me to, um, if you bring somebody in to push you, allow them to do the push. And I've learned from that now. So now when we are listening to community and they're saying, this is, we need X, I'm no longer trying to, and I coach other staff that I'm no longer trying to make them twist into what's palatable for RWJF. My job now is the translator, right? My job is to translate what they're doing, and and keep it authentic to what they need, but shift the narrative to how folks in RWJF will understand and hear it, so that we can receive what we need to receive. So I'm a bridge, I'm a translator. We are bridges, we are translator to the authentic work that is happening in community.
Maisha, as you know, we're in the third quarter of this year. It's been a very interesting year, a very unpredictable year, remains unpredictable. And I find myself talking to people in our local community who, most of what people talk about is how bad it is out there. It's hard to, I think, these days to run into a neighbor, run into somebody, who's at the grocery store, and it not be, do you see what's happening on the news? It's just bleak. All I'm going to do is put my head down and put one foot in front of the other and stop watching the news. So some people are feeling pretty hopeless. And I wouldn't say some people, a lot of people are feeling pretty hopeless. And so the question for you is, do you feel hopeless? Or do you feel hope? And if you do feel hopeful these days, where does that hope come from?
I do not feel hopeless. I do feel annoyed. Um, and I think, my hope comes from a couple of places. It comes from, so I had an opportunity to go to Ghana and go to the slave castles and hear the stories of the ancestors who were brought to the Americas, and what it meant to, what it felt like being actually in the motherland. And that trip for me was transformative, because I said, I'm actually here today in the United States because there was a woman
Hmm.
who refused to give up hope. And so I often lean into whoever my ancestor is from Ghana, who, or wherever I came from in the motherland, who made it across, and the generations who have prevailed and survived
Hmm.
through much worse conditions that we had today. I have no choice but to be hopeful, because if they had given up, I wouldn't be here. So I lean into my faith and my ancestral connection to keep me hopeful for now. And then I look to my son, who's the future, and saying, if I give up on this world, what will he have when he is raising his children and the next generation from our lineage who came from the motherland? So that is actually what keeps my hope full in the times when there is, too much junk happening all over the place, especially as it relates to the attacks on Black people.
Maisha, how can people stay connected to you?
I am on LinkedIn, so definitely look me up, Maisha Easton Simmons on LinkedIn. Um, I don't do some of the other socials anymore, so
Unless you're trying to
LinkedIn
do
is
a line dance.
and I'm ready. I am
Perfect.
ready.
And then as we all get back, I know you're going to get back to your desk. I'm going to get back to our desk here and get back to the work days, as well as our other listeners who are listening. Anything you want to say before we all scram?
I just want to say I appreciate, again, like I said in the beginning, but even just having this conversation with you, that you've created this space. 10 years ago or I'm actually 16 years ago when I entered philanthropy, there wasn't this type of space for us to listen and hear from and learn from experiences. And so I actually, am so grateful that you invited me to be a part of this conversation. And I'm looking forward to listening to more of the podcasts of others. You've talked to some of my friends in the field
Mm-hmm.
already and hear their stories. And, anything that I can do to help share and promote this great work that you're doing, I definitely want to stay connected in order to do that.
Maisha, I just want to say thank you for being a part of our podcast today. You said that it was your first time being on a podcast, and I think you did great. And I hope we treated you well. Thank you for your honesty today. Thank you for choosing to be in philanthropy. Thank you for hearing someone say, you know what, you probably won't be a good fit in philanthropy because you don't have the experience, and that you decided for yourself you're going to try it anyway. I'm so grateful to do this work. Thank you for trusting me in the space of philanthropy to help tell the stories of really amazing, really awesome Black leaders in philanthropy.